The patient checked in 10 minutes after he died. That is how the night shift nurse told it, years later, still tracing the timeline in her head, like she was back in that building, back under that ceiling, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of wheels on tile. Tonight, we're going to walk through that night with her. You don't have to move. You don't have to do anything. Just let the sound of the hospital settle in as we go back to a quiet med-surg floor at 3 in the morning, when most of the city is asleep and time inside the building seems to stretch and warp. Her name, for this story, is Claire. She'd have been a nurse long enough to be comfortable with the chaos. Codes, admits, confused patients pulling at lines, families pacing holes into the floor. Those things didn't scare her anymore. They were just part of the job, like the smell of chlorhexidine or the way your scrubs always picked up the faint scent of the unit and carried it home with you. But this night was different, and it started with something completely normal. A patient who was already very, very sick. It was a Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Winter. The kind of cold that made the automatic doors at the hospital entrance hiss and stutter every time they opened, letting in a brief, icy gust before closing again. On the 4th floor, the med-surg unit hummed with its usual low-level noise. Monitors quietly ticking off heartbeats, IV pumps sighing as they delivered tiny streams of medication. The TV in room 412 murmuring an old rerun to a patient who had fallen asleep hours earlier. Claire was at the nurse's station charting. She liked the night shift. The world felt smaller after midnight, like the building became its own little universe. The chaos of daytime rounded down into something slower, more contemplative. You still had work to do, phones to answer, meds to pass, but the edges softened. You could hear your own footsteps, hear the elevator arrive from down the hall, hear the air handlers cycling above. Glancing at the clock over the station, she saw the time glowing back at her in soft green digits. 2:47 a.m. She had just finished checking on Mr. Daniels in 418. Late 50s, history of heart disease, admitted with chest pain that had turned into something more complicated. His rhythm had been unstable all day. The cardiologist had been up twice. Everyone knew he was fragile, balanced carefully on the line between stable and not. When Claire left his room a few minutes before, his breathing had been shallow but even. The monitor had shown a slightly irregular but acceptable rhythm. The kind of tracing that made you keep one eye on the screen but didn't send you running for the crash cart. She de-adjusted his blankets, checked his IV, whispered something reassuring into the dimness, and then slipped out, pulling the glass door closed behind her. Now she clicked through his chart, documenting his last set of vitals, the appearance of his incision, his pain rating. Her fingers moved automatically across the keyboard, the way they did after years of repetition. Temperature, heart rate, blood pressure. She could practically chart in her sleep. Downstairs, in registration, someone else was also staring at a computer screen, entering information into the hospital's system. A different nurse, in a different part of the building, typing in a familiar pattern of letters and numbers. Name, date of birth, address, insurance information. She didn't know it yet, but the name she was entering was the same name glowing at the top of Claire's screen on the 4th floor. Daniel Arthur Reeves. Same spelling, same date of birth, same middle initial. The hospital system accepted the entries without complaint. It didn't blink. It didn't say, "Hey, wait a second, that guy's already upstairs." It just generated a new encounter number and quietly queued up a task for the admissions printer down the hall. Print wristband. The med-surg hallway was calm when the pager on the desk let out a single, sharp tone. Claire barely looked up. There were all kinds of tones in the hospital. Call lights, bed alarms, telemetry alerts. Over time, you learned what each one meant by instinct. This one, she knew, belonged to the central monitor at the far end of the station. She clicked out of her chart and glanced at the bank of screens. Each patient on telemetry had their little square. Heart rhythm. Oxygen saturation. A tiny digital heartbeat line bouncing along. Mr. Daniels' tracing had changed. She saw it before she fully processed it. The little green line that had been scuttling across in uneven but recognizable bumps had gone strange. Spiky, wide complexes. Then a brief flatness. Then a frantic, erratic run. The machine chimed again, the alarm escalating from a gentle notification to something sharper. Vitach. Claire was already moving. She grabbed the portable monitor strip, hit the code button on the wall as she passed it, and pushed open the door to 418. The room felt colder than it had 10 minutes earlier. That was the first thing she remembered later. The second thing was the silence. No TV. No muttered half-dream words. No hoarse breathing. Mr. Daniels lay in the bed, his head tilted slightly back, eyes half open and unfocused. His chest stuttered once in a weak, ineffectual heave, and then went still. The monitor above his bed beeped in a high, flatline tone as the tracin collapsed into a straight, unforgiving line. "Daniels!" she called, though she knew he couldn't answer. Her hands were already moving. She hit the code button again in the room, started the sequence they all knew by heart. Lower the head of the bed. Start compressions. Call for help. Within seconds, the hallway outside filled with footsteps. Another nurse. The charge nurse. A respiratory therapist dragging equipment. The crash cart rattling. A doctor in night shift scrubs pushing through the cluster with his hair still tousled from where he'd been napping in the call room. The overhead speakers crackled. Code blue, 4th floor, room 418. Code blue, 4th floor, room 418. The hospital did what hospitals do. The practiced choreography unfolded. Voices, commands, the wild beep of a pulse oximeter not finding a pulse, the thump of compressions. Medications pushed into IV lines, a defibrillator charged and used, the metallic smell of sweat and stress in the air. But some codes you can feel in your bones from the very beginning. This one never felt like a fight they were going to win. After 25 minutes, they called it. Time of death, 3:07 a.m. The words hung in the air for a moment, as they always did. Final. Quiet. Heavy. The team stepped back. Oxygen masks were removed. The monitor was silenced. The defibrillator pads were peeled away. The rapid chaos drained out of the room, leaving only the soft whoosh of the wall oxygen and the faint hum of the hallway. Claire stood there, catching her breath, watching the now motionless form in the bed. She'd done this many times, but it never quite became normal. You didn't want it to. She glanced up at the screen above the bed one last time. The time still glowed green in the corner. 3:09 a.m. By the time she stepped out of the room, the overhead call for housekeeping had already gone out. Someone paged the chaplain. The charge nurse walked away to call the family contact on file. Claire stood at the nurse's station for a moment, letting her pulse slow down, feeling the adrenaline drain away. Then she sat, opened the chart, and began documenting the code. Times, interventions, medications, the hours and minutes of someone's last attempt to stay alive, pressed into neat, chronological notes. Downstairs, the admissions printer rattled to life. In the emergency department, the registration clerk, Jenna, was on autopilot. She'd been at this job for years. Night shift, sitting behind glass, watching the parade of people who came in after dark. Tonight had been fairly quiet. A couple of drunks, a kid with a broken wrist, an older woman with shortness of breath sitting in the corner with a nasal cannula, her daughter rubbing circles into her back. The last person to check in had been a man in his early 60s. He walked in alone through the automatic doors. No coat, despite the cold outside. His hair had been flattened on one side like he'd been lying down for a long time. He moved slowly, like each step required more effort than it should, but he wasn't in obvious distress. Jenna remembered him mostly because he seemed polite. "Good evening," he said, voice rough but not weak. "Good morning, technically," she replied with a small smile. He chuckled at that. She handed him the clipboard with the intake form. He took it without looking at it for a second, as if he was trying to orient himself. "Have you been here before?" she asked, fingers poised over her keyboard. He hesitated. "I think so," he said. That wasn't the answer she'd expected. People usually knew. They were either very familiar with the hospital system or not. But she shrugged it off. It was late. People were tired. She was tired. "What's your full name?" "Daniel Arthur Reeves." She typed it in. "Date of birth?" He recited it slowly. "Month? Day? Year?" As she entered the numbers, the system pinged softly to indicate there was already a patient on file with that information. She'd seen that thousands of times. Most people who came in overnight had been there before. Their old records were just part of the system. The screen prompted her. Existing patient. Create new encounter? She clicked yes. The rest of the questions followed. Address, phone number, emergency contact, insurance. He answered all of them in that same slow, careful way, like he was digging the facts out of fog. "You here for chest pain? Shortness of breath?" she asked, doing her usual quick triage questions. He stared at her for a moment. "I just don't feel right," he said. "Like I shouldn't be here." She'd heard all kinds of vague descriptions before. Panic attacks, early strokes. People who just knew something was wrong, even when the numbers didn't show it yet. "Okay," she said. "We'll get you looked at." She finished the registration, hit submit, and the system generated an encounter number. 03-15-22. The timestamp blinked in the corner. She barely looked at it. "Have a seat in the waiting room," she told him. "We'll call you back as soon as we can." He nodded, turned, and walked away with that same slow, heavy gait. The automatic doors stayed closed. The security camera mounted in the corner watched his back as he crossed the polished floor and disappeared into the small group of chairs near the far wall. The printer beside her whirred and spat out a plastic wristband with his name and date of birth printed in neat black letters. She tore it off, set it on the counter, and moved on to the next task in her queue. Upstairs, Claire finished charting the code at 3:20 a.m. Her notes ended the way they always did in these situations. No palpable pulse. No spontaneous breathing. A systole on monitor. Time of death, 03:07. Family notified. She leaned back in the chair, rubbed her eyes, and let out a long breath. The unit felt even quieter now. Codes did that. The whole floor seemed to hold its breath for a while afterward, like the building itself was aware that something significant had just happened. She still had other patients to take care of, pain meds to give, a dressing to check in 414, a confused elderly woman in 410 who would probably need to be gently redirected back to bed at least twice before sunrise. But for a moment, she just sat there, listening. Down one hall, someone laughed softly at something said under their breath. Down the other, a phone rang once at the Secretary S desk and was answered. She glanced at the clock again. 3:22 a.m. The phone on the desk in front of her rang. It was the direct line from the ER. Claire picked it up. "This is 4th floor," she said. The voice on the other end belonged to the ED charge nurse. She sounded tired, but that was normal. "Hey, it is Steph in the ER. We've got an admit coming up to you. Med-surg, telemetry, chest pain, stable for now. We were just waiting on the transport order to finalize, but I wanted to give you a heads up." Claire reached for a scrap of paper, automatically making notes. "Okay, what is the name?" she asked. There was a tiny pause. Daniel Reeves. Date of birth," Steph rattled it off. Claire froze mid-scribble. The numbers, the month and day, the year. They were the same ones she had just typed into a death note. She stared down at her paper. Upstairs in room 418, the monitor was dark now. The crash cart had been wheeled away. A white sheet had been pulled up to cover the still form on the bed. The name?" Claire said slowly, even though she'd heard it clearly. "Daniel Arthur Reeves," Steph repeated. "Why? You already have a Reeves?" Claire's eyes flickered to the census list on the computer screen. There it was. Reeves, Daniel. Room 418. Status: expired. Though the system hadn't updated that part yet. Her scalp prickled. "Yeah," she said carefully. "We do. Or we did. He coded about 20 minutes ago." There was a pause on the other end. "You are kidding." "I wish I were," Claire replied. Steph swore softly under her breath. Papers rustled near the phone. "Same date of birth?" she asked. "Same everything," Claire said. "I just charted it." For a few seconds, all either of them could hear was the faint background noise of their respective units. The beeping monitors, the distant voices, the mechanical sounds of a building that never slept. "I mean, it could be a coincidence," Steph said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Could be," Claire said. Neither of them believed in coincidences like that. Not at 3 in the morning, with the memory of a code still fresh in the air. "I'll check the chart again," Claire added. "Maybe I got something wrong." She knew she hadn't. "Okay," Steph said. "Transport will bring him up as soon as the order finalizes. He's in the waiting room right now." Claire's pen tapped against the desk. "In the waiting room," she repeated. "Yeah," said Steph. "Why?" But Claire didn't answer that part. They hung up with the usual quick exchange of thanks and logistics, but the conversation sat heavy in Claire's mind. She turned back to her computer, opened Mr. Daniels' Mr. Reeves' chart, and scanned the demographic screen. Name: Reeves, Daniel Arthur. Date of birth: the same one Steph had just said. Address, phone number, insurance all there, all normal, all belonging to the man whose body lay upstairs. And then she saw the time of death, still fresh in the nurse note she had just signed. 0307. She looked at her scribbled note from the ER call. Admit in ED waiting room. New encounter started at 0315. 8 minutes. 8 minutes between the moment the doctor had said the words "time of death" and the moment the system had generated a new wristband for a patient with the same name and date of birth. Her chair creaked softly as she leaned back. The hospital didn't it feel like a single building suddenly? It felt like two places overlapping in time, like there was a fracture somewhere between the fourth floor and the ground level. In the emergency department, the waiting room was unusually quiet. The harsh daytime brightness had been turned down to something softer. A TV mounted high on the wall glowed with a silent news anchor, mouthing headlines that no one was really watching. A few people sat scattered in the plastic chairs, slumped in uncomfortable positions, trying to doze. In the far corner, the chair where Jenna had last seen Mr. Reeves was empty. She didn't notice at first. She was busy answering a phone call from a frantic relative who wanted to know if a loved one had been brought in. She checked the list. She soothed. She looked up a room number. When she hung up, she glanced at the stack of wristbands next to her. The top one still had his name on it. She frowned. She thought she remembered him sitting down in the corner. She expected, by now, that a tech or a nurse would have called him back for triage, attached a blood pressure cuff, maybe drawn labs. The usual dance, but no one had touched the band. The triage nurse walked by her glass window a minute later, flipping through a clipboard of paperwork. "Hey," Jenna called, tapping on the glass to get her attention. "Did anyone grab the chest pain in the corner?" "Reeves." The triage nurse blinked at her. "Who?" she asked. "Daniel Reeves," Jenna said. 60-something. Checked in earlier. Said he didn't feel right. The nurse's brow furrowed. "Ivy only had the lady with shortness of breath and the kid with the wrist," she said. "No Reeves." Jenna's fingers drummed the counter. "I definitely registered him," she said. "He's in the system and everything." She spun her monitor around so the triage nurse could see, pulling up the fresh encounter. There it was. Name, date of birth, timestamp. The triage nurse glanced behind her through the open doorway into the waiting room. Jenna followed her gaze. The corner chair was still empty. "Maybe he stepped outside," the nurse suggested. "People wander off all the time." "Maybe," Jenna said. "But he didn't seem like he was going anywhere fast." The nurse shrugged. "We'll call his name. If he doesn't answer, we mark it as a no-show and move on. You know how it is." She moved away toward the waiting room doorway, flipping her clipboard open. Jenna watched as she lifted her head and called out, voice clear but not loud enough to startle the dozing patients. "Daniel Reeves?" The waiting room didn't it so much as twitch. No one sat up. No one looked around. No one raised a hand from a seat or stepped through the doors from outside. The nurse tried again. "Daniel Arthur Reeves?" A man dozing with his hoodie up shifted, slightly in his seat. But that was it. The chair in the corner remained empty. The triage nurse scribbled something on her paper and came back. "Maybe he left," she said. "He is not here." "Did you see him at all?" Jenna asked. The nurse shook her head. "I would be noticed someone new." Jenna looked down at the wristband again. The plastic caught the fluorescent light, the letters printed perfectly, waiting to encircle a wrist that apparently wasn't in the building anymore. She felt a faint chill slide over her shoulders. She turned and glanced at the security monitor mounted on the wall, showing a 4-camera view of the entrance area, the automatic doors, the registration desk, the waiting area. The timestamp in the corner read 03:18 a.m. On one of the feeds, she could see the chair in the corner. Empty. "Can you rewind that?" she asked the security guard, who sat half dozing in front of the screen. He blinked himself fully awake and straightened, hands moving over the controls. The footage rewound in a jerky blur. People walked backward. A wheelchair rolled itself in reverse. The doors opened and closed in quick, stuttering loops. "Stop there," Jenna said when she saw herself hand the clipboard over the counter. The guard paused. The image froze with her arm extended, the clipboard hovering between her and the man standing on the other side of the glass. He was turned slightly away from the camera, but she could still see his profile, the flattening of his hair, the hospital lighting making his skin look washed out. Her memory was not wrong. He'd been there. "Play it," she said. The footage rolled forward. She watched herself talk to him, pass the clipboard, point toward the waiting room. She watched him turn, walk across the frame, and head toward the chairs. He passed briefly behind a column that partially blocked the camera's view of the corner. He never came out on the other side. The chair that should have been in his path remained empty. The space where he should have reappeared showed only the edge of another chair and a small table stacked with outdated magazines. The guard frowned. "That's weird," he said softly. "Can you switch to the other angle?" Jenna asked. He flipped to a different camera. This one showed more of the chairs, including the corner. The timestamp matched. They watched again. Him at the desk, the clipboard, the walk. He disappeared behind the column, and this time they could see the area he should have walked into from a second angle. He didn't appear. He just vanished. The guard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Probably a glitch," he said quickly. "These cameras are old." "Yeah," Jenna said, though her voice didn't sound convinced even to her own ears. If it was a glitch, it was a very specific one. One that erased one man and nothing else. She picked up the wristband, feeling the plastic flecks slightly in her hand. It was strangely heavy for something so small. "I am going to call upstairs," she said. When Claire answered the call from the ED again, her fingers were still resting on the keyboard, hovering over the demographic screen. "Fourth floor, this is Claire." "Hey," Jenna said, her voice tight at the edges. "This is registration downstairs. I need to ask you something weird." Claire almost laughed, except nothing about the night felt funny anymore. "Get in line," she said softly. "What's up?" "You have a patient named Daniel Reeves?" Jenna asked. "We had one," Claire replied. "He passed about 40 minutes ago." "You were sure about the date of birth?" "Positive. It's on my screen. Can you tell me what time he was admitted originally?" Claire scrolled back through the chart. The original encounter was from earlier that day. The ER note. The first set of vitals. "He checked in at 15:04 yesterday," she said. "Why?" Jenna swallowed. We just registered someone with the same name and date of birth," she said. "About 20 minutes after you called his time of death." Claire leaned forward. "And?" "And he's not here," Jenna said. "I mean, he was here. I talked to him. But he never showed up on any of the cameras walking into the waiting room, and when we called his name, nobody answered. It's like he just disappeared." Claire stared across the nurses' station, down the short hallway that led toward 418. The door was partially closed now. There was a "Do Not Enter" sign taped temporarily to it while the body awaited transport. "What time did you register him?" she asked. 03:15, Jenna said. "Timestamp S right here." Claire's eyes dropped to the death note one more time. 03:07. She imagined the timeline as a hallway in her head, the way the hospital itself was built. At one end, in room 418, a man was dying. 8 minutes later, his name and date of birth were typed into a new form downstairs. A new chart opened. A new wristband printed. "What did he say?" Claire asked quietly. "When he came in." Jenna S.'s voice dropped too, like the words didn't quite want to be spoken at full volume. "He said he didn't feel right," she said, "like he shouldn't be here." For a while, neither of them said anything. On each end of the line, the sounds of the hospital filled the silence instead. The distant wheels, the overhead pages, the hum of machines. Then Claire spoke again. "Do you still have the wristband?" she asked. "Yeah," Jenna said. "It never went on anyone. Can you send it up with transport? When they come for the body?" Jenna hesitated. "Is that allowed?" she asked. "I'll take responsibility," Claire said. "Just send it up. Please." "Okay," Jenna said softly. "I'll tape it to the paperwork." Transport arrived for Mr. Reeves at 3:45 a.m. The orderly, Marcus, had been working nights for years. He'd seen plenty of things that he never talked about outside the building. Long, quiet rides with covered forms on gurneys. Elevators that seemed to stop on floors no one had requested. The feeling of not being alone when you were, technically, the only living person in the room. When he stepped into 418, he gave the kind of respectful nod he always did, even though the patient couldn't see it. "Evening, sir," he murmured. "We'll take good care of you." The sheet was pulled up to the chin. A toe tag had already been attached. The nurse had placed a hand gently on the still shoulder one last time before stepping out. On top of the chart at the end of the bed, there was an envelope with the usual paperwork. On the front, someone had handwritten, "For the morgue. At 10. Tech." Taped to the outside of the envelope was a plastic wristband. Marcus frowned slightly. They usually didn't send extra wristbands. He lifted it with 2 fingers, reading the name printed in clear black letters. Reeves, Daniel Arthur. He looked from the band to the tag. Same name. He was not a superstitious man by nature. But he was not an idiot either. Hospitals had a way of shaking any certainty you had about how the world worked. He slid the band back under the tape and smoothed the edge down carefully. Then he moved the gurney into position, transferred the body with professional, gentle movements, and wheeled it out of the room. As he turned the corner toward the elevator, he could feel the weight of the building settle around him. The nighttime version of the hospital, quieter, but somehow more awake in another sense. He swore, just for a second. He could hear a second set of footsteps behind his own. Claire finished her shift at 7 a.m. The sky outside the narrow windows had started to lighten by then, a thin gray seeping in around the edges of the blinds. Day shift nurses arrived, hair pulled back tight, coffee in hand, laughing about something that had happened on their way in. The building felt like it was waking up, but the memory of the night sat heavy in Claire S. bones. During handoff, she debated saying anything. It sounded ridiculous when she rehearsed the words in her head. We had a patient code at 3:07, and then someone registered him again at 3:15 downstairs. Same name, same date of birth. They talked to him. He sat in the waiting room. Then he vanished before he could be called back. It sounded like a bad horror movie, like the kind of story the day shift rolled their eyes at and blamed on lack of sleep. So when the day nurse asked, "Anything unusual overnight?" Claire just said, "We had a code in 418. Time of death, 3:07. Family notified." The rest was pretty routine, but she couldn't leave without at least looking at the chart one more time. After she'd given report, after she'd signed off on her meds and notes, she sat alone at the station for a moment and pulled up the administrative log. 2 encounters. Same man. One began at 15:04 the day before. One began at 03:15 that morning. She checked the location field in the second one. It still read ED waiting room. No vitals, no triage note, no physician evaluation, no discharge, no transfer, just nothing. An encounter that began and never went anywhere. She clicked into the access log, the part of the system that showed which users had opened the chart, at what times, from what departments. Her own username appeared multiple times on the first encounter. On the second, there were only 2 entries. One for Jenna in registration at 03:15:22, and one that made her skin prickle, even though she knew there had to be some rational explanation, some glitch in the system, some leftover artifact from a previous visit. Nurse ID, Reeves, Daniel RN. Access time, 03, 07, 03. She stared at it for a long time. They didn't have a nurse by that name. The system still sometimes auto-filled names and roles strangely. There were bugs, there were updates, there were always IT tickets floating around about something not working right. She told herself that was all it was. Still, the coincidence of the time 03:07, the exact minute she called his death upstairs, made something deep in her spine tighten. She logged out. At the bottom of the stairs on her way out of the building, she passed the main waiting room. Daylight was trickling in now, just enough to reflect off the polished floor. In the far corner, a man sat in one of the chairs, head bowed slightly, hands folded together. For a second, Claire S. Hart stuttered. The slope of his shoulders, the shape of his profile. It was so much like. But then he shifted, lifting his head, and she saw he was someone else entirely. Younger, different hair, different face. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Outside, the cold morning air hit her face. She walked across the parking lot as the sun edged up behind the low clouds, thinking about the night, about the way time in the hospital seemed to bend around certain moments. Maybe it was all just a fluke, she told herself. A shared name, a system error. The kind of thing that happened once in a million admissions. But a week later, when she came back on for another night shift, Jenna was waiting for her in the break room, eyes wide and tired. "You are not going to believe this," she said. Claire felt that familiar prickling at the back of her neck. "Try me," she replied. Jenna slid a folded piece of paper across the table. On it, she had written a list of names and dates. At the top was Daniel Arthur Reeves, with his twin encounter times and the dates of his birth and death. Below that were 3 other names. 2 men, 1 woman. Each had 2 encounters within minutes of each other. Each had one that ended with a time of death. Each had another that started in the waiting room or at triage shortly after. Same names, same dates of birth. Nobody could explain it. Security had combed through footage. It had crawled through logs. Administration had muttered about system glitches and cross-linked files, about misclicked buttons and delayed registrations. But in each case, there was a staff member who swore they had talked to the second version, had looked them in the eye, had watched them walk toward the chairs, and then not be there anymore. "Do you ever feel like," Jenna said quietly, "this place doesn't always know the difference between people coming in and people going out?" Claire thought of the quiet hallway at 3 in the morning, the sound of the code alarm, the stillness after. The sensation, just for a second, that something had brushed past her shoulder, as if on its way somewhere else. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes the door swings both ways." They never did figure it out. The encounters stayed in the system, half-finished, like bookmarks in a book that never got to its final chapter. Officially, they were classified as registration errors. Unofficially, they became one more story folded into the whispered lore of the night shift. New nurses heard it months later, sitting at the station at 2 in the morning, eyes wide as someone older and more tired than them said, "Did anyone tell you about the man who checked in after he died?" The details changed in the retellings, the way they always do. The time shifted by a minute here or there. The description of his face grew more blurred or more specific, depending on who was speaking. Sometimes the chair in the waiting room was said to be icy cold when they finally touched it. Sometimes they swore it was still warm, but the spine of the story stayed the same. A patient coded on the 4th floor. Time of death 3:07. 8 minutes later, he walked up to the registration desk downstairs and said, "I don't feel right. I don't think I should be here." The building took his name and date of birth one more time, printed one more band, opened one more chart. And then, somewhere between the desk and the waiting room chairs, he stepped through a doorway no camera could see. Upstairs, in a room that had been quickly turned over and prepped for the next admission, a fresh set of linens lay smooth and untouched on the bed. The monitors were silent. The air smelled faintly of bleach, and something else, something that came after. Downstairs, in a drawer in the morgue, Marcus sometimes imagined he heard the faintest rustle of plastic when he walked by the slot with Daniel Reeves' tag on it, like a wristband shifting against skin that no longer needed it. But when he opened the drawer, everything was still. The hospital moved on, as it always does. New patients came. Old patients went home, or didn't he? The cycles repeated. And somewhere in the system, in lines of code and database entries, the twin encounters remained. One ending in a time of death. The other, eternally waiting, status. Checked in. No discharge. No transfer. No follow-up. Just a patient who came back for a few minutes after the monitors went flat, sat down in a chair that was still warm when someone finally touched it, and then left again through a door only he could see. If you ever find yourself in a hospital waiting room after midnight, with the lights turned down and the TV murmuring softly to itself, you might notice an empty chair in the corner that no one seems to sit in for very long. And if, for a second, you feel like someone just walked past you, brushing the edge of your awareness on their way to or from some place you can't quite name, it might just be your imagination. Or it might be someone who checked in a few minutes too late. Story 2. The bed that never stayed empty. The bed in room 417 never stayed empty. That's how the story always started when the night shift nurses told it. Not with a jump scare, not with screaming. Just that one simple, unsettling fact, said in the kind of quiet tone people use when they're trying not to sound superstitious. The bed in 417 never stayed empty. Tonight, we're going to sit with that story for a while. You don't have to move. You don't have to picture everything if you don't want to. Just let the sound of the hospital settle around you as we go back to a med-surg floor a few years ago when 417 was still on the census list, still part of the unit, still a room you could technically assign if you ran out of options. And when the nurses tried very hard not to, the nurse at the center of this story, we'll call her Lena. She'd been doing nights long enough for the rhythm to feel normal. The daytime chaos felt strange to her now, doctors rounding in packs, family members crowded into rooms, physical therapists and dietitians weaving through the halls like a choreographed dance. Night shift was slower, simpler, less chatter, more hum. You could actually hear the building breathe. Lena liked that. She liked walking past the big windows at 3 in the morning and seeing nothing but her own reflection and the faint lights from the parking lot. She liked the way voices softened after midnight, the way even the sickest patients seemed a little more peaceful when the rest of the world was asleep. She did not like 417. The first time she heard about the room, she was brand new to the unit. She detransferred from another hospital across town, same city, different building. On her first night, the charge nurse walked her through the layout. Supply room here, medication room here, clean utility, dirty utility, nurse servers, crash cart. When they turned down the far hallway, the charge nurse's footsteps slowed just a little. These last 3 rooms are 415, 416, 417, she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, we don't use 417 if we can help it. Lena glanced at the door as they passed. The glass window was covered by the thin hospital blinds, slats tilted down. The nameplate beside the door was empty. No dry erase marker notes, no patient label. "Why not?" she asked. "Long story," the charge nurse said. "You'll hear it sooner or later. For now, just know that if census is low and you re-chosen rooms, stick with the others." At the end of the hall, they turned back toward the nurses' station. The charge nurse started explaining documentation workflows. But Lena was half listening, her attention still snagged on the sealed blinds of 417. You can work in a hospital for years without thinking about ghosts. You see too much real suffering, too many real emergencies, to dwell on anything invisible. Eventually, you stop flinching at alarms. You stop jumping when a bed rail clanks in the next room. You stop reacting to the random noises buildings make in the middle of the night. But everyone has at least one place in their hospital that feels wrong. A stretch of hallway, a particular elevator, a bathroom no one likes after dark, a room where too many people have died. On this unit, it was 417. For the first few weeks, Lena didn't have to deal with it at all. The hospital was in a rare lull, admissions down, discharges steady, enough beds free that the charge nurses could choose assignments without scraping the bottom of the barrel. But she noticed it. She noticed how, when the unit clerk printed the bed census and taped it to the board, 417 was always blank. She noticed how, when transport rolled a new patient onto the unit and asked, "Where are we going?" the charge nurse would say, "Let SC 412 is clean, 408 is open, 417 is no, skip 417, use 415 instead." She noticed how no one ever opened the blinds. It wasn't until her 3rd week that she heard the story. It was 2:30 in the morning, the hour when most of the medications were passed and the labs were drawn. But it was still too early for morning vitals. The TV in the lounge hummed quietly, with some late-night infomercial no one was watching. The nurse's station had that exhausted, slightly punchy energy that comes in the middle of a long shift. Lena sat at the far end of the desk, charting. Across from her, an older nurse named Trish was spooning yogurt out of a small cup, eyes fixed on her screen. One of the newer nurses, a guy named Kevin, swiveled in his chair and said, "Okay, I have a question. What is the deal with 417? I've been here a month and nobody will assign it. Did something happen in there? Trish didn't look up. It's just out of service, she said. That is not an answer, he said. Out of service how? Like plumbing? Electrical? Is it structurally unstable? Is there a raccoon living in the ceiling? Lena smiled into her chart. The unit clerk, scrolling through emails at the corner workstation, snorted. It's haunted, she said matter-of-factly. There we go, Kevin said, pointing. That's what I was waiting for. I knew somebody was going to say haunted eventually. What happened? Trish sighed and set down her spoon. You really want to hear this on a night when you were assigned to 415? She asked. Absolutely, he said. I love that kind of stuff. Lena tried to keep documenting, but her fingers had stilled on the keyboard. A couple of years ago, Trish said slowly, we had a long-term patient in there. Neuro case. Young guy. Anoxic brain injury. He had an arrest at home, was resuscitated, but there was a lot of damage. He wasn't brain dead, but he wasn't awake either. Kind of in between. She paused. He was in 417 for months. Same bed, same room. His family came every day. They decorated. Photos, blankets, little signs. They played his favorite music. They were convinced he could hear them. That's rough, Kevin said softly. Yeah. Rough, Trish agreed. He coded twice while he was here. Both times they got him back, but each time he lost a little more. More reflexes gone, less response. Eventually, he was basically just here, existing, machines doing most of the work. She picked up her spoon again, but didn't he eat? And then, one night, he died. The way a lot of people like that do. Slow, quiet. Respiratory started dropping. Blood pressure followed. Heart couldn't keep up. No code, because he was DNR by then. His parents were with him. It was actually peaceful, for the most part. She didn't say the part every night nurse knows that peaceful deaths can still leave a heavy feeling in the room afterward. Like the air hasn't caught up yet. After that, the bed was turned over, she went on. Housekeeping came, stripped everything, wiped down every surface. They removed the family S decorations. The EEG machine was rolled out. The ventilator went back to respiratory. We put a new mattress on the bed. And then what? Kevin asked. And then we started trying to use the room again, she said. But things were off. A couple weeks later, we had a patient in there who kept complaining that someone was breathing in his ear at night. He'd hit the call light, say he felt someone sitting on the edge of the bed. We'd come in, nobody there. Bed alarms wouldn't register anyone. Mattress sensor showed nothing. That's creepy, the unit clerk muttered. Another patient, Trish said, woke up with all his EEG leads stuck to his chest. The machine had been unplugged. The tech swore she had taken everything off and left. In the morning, he had a perfect trace recorded from 2:14 to 2:29 a.m. Only no one had ordered it, and no one had turned it on. Lena felt the skin on the back of her neck tighten. How is that even possible? Kevin asked. It shouldn't be, Trish said. Engineering checked the room. Electrical checked the outlets. Biomed checked the machine. They couldn't find anything wrong, but it kept happening. Little stuff. The bed unmaking itself between rounds, the EEG powering up with no one touching it. The door unlocked when we knew we delocked it. That kind of thing. So, you decided it was haunted, Kevin said. We decided it was more trouble than it was worth, Trish replied. Too many patient complaints, too many weird incidents. Admin finally said, fine, flag it as out of service until we can repurpose it. And then they never did. The unit clerk swiveled her chair to face them. "And that," she said, "is why I will literally sleep in the supply closet before I sit down in 417 by myself." They laughed, just enough to break the tension. But that night, when Lena walked her rounds and passed the door to 417, she felt something she couldn't laugh off. The blinds were tilted just enough for her to see a sliver of the room. The bed was made. White sheet, blue blanket, one pillow. She told herself it was just another empty room, just another space with no one in it. But as she passed, the air felt a degree colder, like stepping through a patch of shade on a sunny day. She didn't look in, not yet. The first time she did was about a month later, on a night when the hospital was fuller than she'd ever seen it. Flu season. Beds in hallways in the ED. Patients admitted and held downstairs for hours, while bed control scrambled to find places to put them. Just after midnight, the charge nurse hung up the phone and rubbed her eyes with one hand. "We getting slammed," she said. "They've got 2 more admits downstairs for us, and nowhere to put them. Ivy filled every room except 417. Lena felt her stomach dip. "Can't we float someone?" one of the nurses asked. "ICU is full. Step-down is full. The other med-surg unit is full. Unless you want to house people in the break room, we're going to have to use it," the charge nurse said. Someone made a face. "Come on," she said. "It's a room. It's 4 walls and a bed. Whatever's wrong with it is in our heads." Another nurse, one who'd been there almost as long as Trish, raised an eyebrow. "Tell that to the EEG tech," she said. The charge nurse sighed. "Look, we'll put the most stable admit there," she said. "Someone calm, oriented, low acuity. We'll keep the door open. Nobody has to be alone in there with the lights off. But we can't leave patients down in the ED indefinitely because we re-spooked by a room." She looked at Lena. "You've got the lightest assignment," she said. 2 walkie-talkies and a post-op who's sleeping. Take the new admit in 417. If there's any weirdness, we'll swap them out tomorrow, okay? In a hospital, you learn where the line is between not okay and it's still your job. This was one of those moments. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to say no, wanted to say, give it to someone else. But the ED was full. People were lying on stretcher pads in bright hallways, sick and miserable. There were only so many actual beds in the building. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll take it." The admit was a man in his 70s with pneumonia, tired but polite, on 2 liters of oxygen by nasal cannula, coughing damply into a tissue every few minutes. His name was Mr. Harlan. He had a soft, reedy voice and apologized every time he spoke, like using his vocal cords might be inconveniencing someone. Transport rolled his stretcher up from the ED, parked it outside 417, and handed Lena the clipboard. "Good luck," the transporter said under his breath. Lena forced a small smile. "Thanks." She unlocked the door. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something older underneath. The lights flicked on overhead, washing everything in their familiar sterile glow. "Sorry, it's a little cold in here," she said, out of habit. "We'll get you warmed up." "It's fine," he murmured. "I've been cold since I got sick. Doesn't it seem to matter what I do?" She transferred him to the bed, rolling the stretcher close, lowering rails, pivoting his weight slowly. His skin felt cool through the thin gown, his fingers a little bluish at the tips. She adjusted his oxygen, attached him to the monitor, placed the call light in his hand. "There," she said. "You're all set for now. I'll be back in a few minutes to check your vitals and bring your meds." He nodded, eyes half closed already. She stepped back, checking the lines, the IV pole, the way the monitor wires draped across the blanket. Everything looked right. She turned to leave and, without thinking, glanced toward the corner where the EEG machine had once stood in the earlier story. Now there was nothing there but an empty wall and a small rolling table. The air felt heavy. She shook it off, stepped into the hall, and pulled the door half closed, leaving it open just enough to hear if he called out. At the nurse's station, she started entering his arrival vitals into the system. Oxygen saturation, heart rate, respiratory rate. She could still hear his cough every now and then, muffled through the partially open door. 10 minutes later, she glanced up from her charting. The cough had stopped. The monitor at the central station showed a normal sinus rhythm in his little square. Oxygen saturation holding in the low 90s. Blood pressure okay for now. She told herself he'd fallen asleep. It was late. He was exhausted. She finished an assessment note on another patient, then grabbed a set of vitals equipment and walked back down the hall. As she approached 417, she slowed. The cough hadn't come back. The monitor above the door was silent. The room S light glowed under the door. She nudged it open with her hip. "Mr. Harlan? I am back to." The bed was empty. For one wild heartbeat, everything in her body screamed. Then she saw him. He was standing at the window, one hand braced against the sill, breathing in shallow pulls as he stared out at the dark parking lot below. "You gave me a scare," she said, exhaling. "You were not supposed to be up walking by yourself." He didn't turn all the way toward her, just enough that she could see the profile of his face. "I thought I heard someone," he said, in that soft, apologetic voice. "Breathing. Over here." He gestured toward the far side of the bed, the side nearest the corner. "I wanted to see if someone had come in," he added. "There's no one else in here," she said gently. "It's us, just us." He tilted his head, listening to something she couldn't hear. "It stopped when I stood up," he said, "but it was close, right by my ear." The hair on her arms lifted. "It was probably the vent," she said, "or the oxygen. This place makes a lot of weird noises." "Yes," he said slowly, "it does." He let her help him back into bed, let her tuck the blankets around his legs. She checked his oxygen saturation again, watched the numbers creep up once he stopped exerting himself. She made a mental note to ask respiratory to come evaluate him in the morning. When she stepped out of the room again, she closed the door almost completely this time, leaving only a crack. At the station, she tried to focus. Past meds. Charted. Answered a phone call from the lab, but the awareness of that door down the hall pressed at the back of her mind. Every time she glanced toward the central monitor, his tracing looked fine little green bumps marching steadily across the screen. Around 3 a.m., she got up for rounds again. Lena liked that hour in theory. The rest of the world felt impossibly far away at 3 a.m. The hospital existed in its own contained universe. Outside, the city S noise was muffled. Inside, the squeak of her shoes on the floor seemed almost too loud. She started at one end of the hall, checking on patients one by one. Lungs, lines, Foley bags, dressings, pain, confusion, sleep. By the time she reached 415, she was tired in that bone-deep way that only night shift nurses understand, mind sharp, body heavy. 417 waited at the end of the short cross corridor. She could see the strip of light under the door. She hesitated for half a second, then pushed it open. The bed was not empty, but it didn't look the way she had left it. The blanket had twisted itself into a rope across the center of the mattress. The top sheet was half untucked, dragging toward the floor. Both pillows were dented, as if someone had knelt on them. Mr. Harlan lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. His chest rose and fell too quickly, nostrils flaring around the oxygen cannula. "Hey," she said, crossing the room. "You okay?" He swallowed. He sat on the bed. He whispered. "Who did?" she asked. "The man," he said, "the one who was breathing. He sat right there." He pointed toward the edge of the bed, near the foot. "I couldn't see him very well. It was dark. But the mattress." His voice broke. "It went down." "You didn't depress the call light," she said gently. "I thought if I moved, he'd do something," he said. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, breathing, like he was tired. She checked his pulse. It was fast, but regular. "Is he gone now?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "when you opened the door." She smoothed the blankets, trying to ignore the way the mattress still felt warm where he pointed. "You are safe," she said, as much for herself as for him. "You okay? No one else here but us." "Can I be moved?" he asked suddenly. "To another room? Please?" There were a dozen reasons to say no. Bed management, assignments, the full census. But she found herself nodding. "I'll talk to the charge nurse," she said. "We'll see what we can do." He closed his eyes briefly in what looked like relief. Back at the station, the charge nurse didn't even argue. "If he's asking to move, we removing him," she said. "I don't care if we have to double up someone in a semi-private for a few hours. I don't like patients being scared in their own rooms." "Should we stop using 4117 again?" Lena asked. The charge nurse rubbed her forehead. "We were supposed to discuss that at the safety meeting last month," she said. "But bed control had a meltdown about losing another room. Let us just get him out of there. We'll deal with the rest later." Within 20 minutes, Mr. Harlan was settled in 409 instead. He thanked Lena twice, squeezing her hand with cool fingers. "Sleep," she said. "We'll check on you in a bit." By the time she walked back toward 417 to close up the room, a strange calm had settled on the unit again. She pushed the door open slowly. The bed was made, perfectly. Blanket smoothed, sheet tucked, pillows plumped. She had not touched it since she'd been in there last. No one else had gone in. She would have seen them pass the station. And yet, the bed looked like something out of a brochure. Her scalp prickled. She backed out, pulled the door closed, and turned the lock. It should have ended there. But nothing about 417 ever ended cleanly. The next week, the bed unmade itself. Not once, not twice. Over and over. Housekeeping stripped it one morning, folded the sheets into neat stacks on the chair, left the mattress bare with the plastic cover gleaming under the overhead light. By afternoon, a nurse walking past glanced in and saw the fitted sheet half on, half off, stretched crooked across the bed, as if someone had tried to make it in a hurry. She called housekeeping. "Did you start making 417 and get called away?" she asked. "No," the housekeeper said. "Nobody has been in there since I stripped it." They remade the bed completely, tucked the corners tight, left. An hour later, the blanket draped on the floor. The pillows lay scattered, one upside down, one at the foot of the bed. The mattress bore the distinct impression of an outline. Not clear enough to be a body, but not nothing either. A sag in the middle. like someone of average weight had just gotten up. It became a pattern. They would make the bed. The bed would not stay made. They unplugged everything in the room. They removed equipment. They rolled every electronic out and piled them in the corridor. The EEG machine, which had been gone for months, came back one afternoon for a patient on another floor. The tech wheeled it past 417. As she passed, the monitor flickered on for no reason. Bright blue logo flashing in the dim hallway. She stopped, frowned, checked the cords. "It's not even plugged in yet," she said. She told Lena about it later, shaking her head. "I've been doing EEGs for 10 years, she said. "Machines don't just boot themselves." A respiratory therapist swore she heard someone in 417 one night, while walking past slow, measured breathing. The kind you hear when a patient is deeply asleep and dreaming. She opened the door, annoyed that anyone would be in there when it was clearly marked as out of service. The air was still. The lights were off. The shadows pooled in the corners. The bed lay perfectly made. But the sound had been so distinct that she walked all the way to the bedside and put her hand flat on the mattress. Warm. Not like the neutral room temperature of untouched linens. Warm like someone had been lying there a few minutes earlier. After that, the respiratory therapist refused to go. Down that end of the hall alone after midnight. Weeks turned into months. 417 stayed on the books as a usable room. Bed management pushed for it every time census climbed. The charge nurses pushed back as much as they could, citing patient complaints, staff discomfort, the lack of any real reason to put people in there when other rooms were open. But sometimes things aligned just wrong. A spike in ED holds, a cluster of admissions, an overflow from another unit, and someone got assigned to 417 again. Those patients never stayed long. One woke up screaming that someone was pressing on his chest. Another demanded transfer after feeling the bed sink under unseen weight. A third, a stoic woman in her 60s, who had been through 3 surgeries and said nothing rattled her, called the nurse at 4 a.m. and whispered, "There is a man standing at the foot of the bed. I can hear him breathing. I can see him, but I know he is there. Please get me out of this room." Lena was there for that one. She walked in, heart pounding, turned on every light, checked every corner, every closet. Nothing. But the room felt crowded, like she had to squeeze herself between invisible shapes to get to the chair. They moved that patient too. The bed stayed. The bed always stayed. It became a quiet pattern in the Unit S life. The census rose, resources thinned. 417 got used. Something strange happened. 417 got emptied. The door would stay closed for a while, then someone higher up would say, "We can waste a perfectly good room," and the cycle would start again. It might have continued like that indefinitely, if not for the night of the storm. The weather had been bad all afternoon, heavy clouds rolling in, the sharp scent of ozone in the air, the kind of wind that made the Hospital S automatic doors struggle and wheeze. By the time night shift took over, thunder was rumbling in low, distant growls that vibrated the window glass. Rain lashed the side of the building. The parking lot lights glowed in hazy halos. Ambulance sirens rose and fell, more frequent than usual. Storms brought people in, car accidents, falls, asthma exacerbations, anxiety attacks. By midnight, the ED called up, frantic. "We reboarding 6 down here and have 5 more ambulances on the way," the ED charge nurse said. "We need beds. Anything you've got." The med-surg charge nurse stared at her census. "We re-full," she said. "You never full," the ED nurse countered. "What about 417? The charge nurse closed her eyes briefly. "We really don't like using that room," she said. "Yeah? Well, we don't like lining people in hallways too deep," the ED nurse snapped. "I've got a stable admit, low acuity, afraid of storms, just needs observation and some meds. Give me 417, please." There were 1,000 policies and pressures swirling around that decision. Patient safety, staff concern, administrative expectations, ED throughput benchmarks, financial metrics that no one on the floor ever saw but still felt. In the end, the charge nurse sighed. "Fine," she said. "One night." She hung up and turned to Lena. "I swear I am not doing this on purpose," she said, "but I need you on 417 again." "Of course you do," Lena muttered. But there was no heat in it. She understood. They all did. The patient they sent up was a woman in her late 30s named Alicia. She was pale, shaking, eyes wide as the thunder rattled the windows. "I am sorry," she said, as Lena helped her off the stretcher and into the bed. "I know this is probably stupid. I just get really bad during storms. My heart races. I can catch my breath. I feel like I am going to die." "It is not stupid," Lena said. "We see a lot of people during weather like this. You are safe here. We'll keep an eye on you." Her vitals weren't terrible. Elevated heart rate, slightly high blood pressure, oxygen saturation, okay. The ED had given her some Ativan, which was starting to soften the sharp edges of her panic. "This room feels cold," Alicia said, as she settled back against the pillow. "It says probably just the vent," Lena said. "We'll get you an extra blanket." She layered another sheet over her, fluffed the pillow, attached the monitor leads. The thunder outside rolled again, a long, low sound that seemed to vibrate up from the floor. "Will you leave the door open?" Alicia asked. "Just a little. I don't like feeling closed in." "Of course," Lena said. She propped the door open with a rubber wedge, making sure the slit of hallway light cut across the floor like a protective line. At the desk, the storm became background noise, a constant rumble under the usual hospital symphony of alarms and conversations. Every so often, a flash of lightning would bloom white across the windows, leaving ghost images on Lena S. retinas. She checked on Alicia every 30 minutes. Each time, the woman seemed a little calmer, eyes heavier, breathing slower. The Ativan was doing its job. "Try to rest," Lena said on her 2 a.m. round. "You're doing okay." "Will you hear me if I call?" Alicia asked sleepily. "I will," Lena said. "I promise." She stepped out, left the door propped, and kept moving. Somewhere around 2:40, a strange thing started happening at the central monitor. Alicia's heart rate, which had been in the 90s, began creeping up. Respiratory rate ticked up too. 28 breaths per minute. Lena frowned and stood. Before she could head down the hall, an alarm chirped. Not a full code alarm, just a soft advisory. Increased heart rate sustained above threshold. She walked quickly toward 417. The thunder outside had gone quieter for the moment, as if the storm were pausing to inhale. The air in the hallway felt charged, tiny hairs on her arms standing up. As she approached, she slowed. Alicia's voice drifted through the partially open door, soft and strained. "Please stop," she was whispering. "Please. I don't like that." Lena pushed the door fully open. The room's overhead light was off, just as she left it. The only illumination came from the monitor above the bed, and the spill of hallway light across the floor. Alicia lay on her side, facing the doorway. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the glow of the monitor. She held the call light in one hand, but hadn't pressed it. "What is wrong?" Lena asked, stepping inside. "He keeps sitting on the bed," Alicia whispered. "Who?" Lena said, even though she already knew the answer. "The man," she said. "I can see him. It's like he's just wait. But the mattress goes down, right behind my back, and I hear him breathing. It's right in my ear. It's not the storm. It's not the vent. It's oh." Her voice broke. Tears started sliding down her face. "Please get me out of this room." The monitor beeped again. Her heart rate had jumped into the 120s. Lena crossed the room in 3 strides. Up close, she saw it too, the subtle dip in the mattress behind Alicia. An indentation where no one was sitting. The blanket pulled slightly tighter at that spot, as if pinned by an invisible knee. She didn't stop to think. "Okay," she said. "We re-movin'." She stepped back into the hall and hit the wall phone. "I need the charge nurse in 417, she said, "and we need an open bed somewhere. Anywhere. Now." "Everything all right?" the charge nurse asked. "No," Lena said, "and I am not having a panic patient decompensate because of this room. Get me a bed." By some minor miracle, one had just opened on the other wing discharge at midnight. Room cleaned by 2:30, not yet reassigned. Within 15 minutes, they had Alicia in a wheelchair. IV pole rolling beside her, blankets wrapped around her shoulders. As they rolled her out, she kept looking back over her shoulder at the bed. "He's still there," she whispered. "He's watching us leave." Lena didn't look. She didn't want to know if the mattress was rising behind them. After Alicia was settled and her heart rate started to drift down, Lena walked back to 417 alone. The door was still open. The monitor still glowed. She stepped inside. The bed was empty. The mattress had smoothed itself. The blanket lay in a perfect, calm line. The pillow bore no trace of a head. The room smelled faintly of ozone and something heavier, like the metallic tang of old blood, though she knew there hadn't been any in there. On the wall near the head of the bed, an old EEG outlet plate sat unused, a relic from when this had been a step-down room. As she stood there, listening to the storm rumble again outside, the old EEG monitor perched on a cart in the corner flickered on, despite the fact that it had no reason to be in that room and definitely no cord connected. The display flashed blue for a second. Then it blinked off again. That was the night the charge nurse finally wrote it up. Not as a ghost story, not as a haunting, just as a pattern of events that could no longer be ignored. Multiple patient complaints, multiple staff complaints, persistent reports of unexplained bed movement and equipment activation. She sent the incident report up the chain, attached notes from previous episodes, included the informal recommendation that 4x17 be removed from service permanently for the emotional safety of patients and staff. Administration called a meeting. Engineering was there. Biomed was there. Nursing leadership, risk management. They reviewed power logs, video clips, equipment maintenance records. Nothing on paper justified decommissioning a perfectly usable room. But there does a strange calculus that happens in hospitals, somewhere between what you can measure and what you can see. A room where patients consistently report fear, where staff avoid going, where equipment behaves unpredictably even if you can prove why costs you something. Over time, that cost shows up in subtle ways, in turnover, in patient satisfaction scores, in incident reports. So, a month after the storm, on a random Tuesday afternoon, a memo went out. Room 417 is hereby designated non-clinical space. Effective immediately, it will be taken off the bed census and no longer used for patient care. No one on night shift celebrated. They just breathed a little easier. Housekeeping stripped the bed one last time. Facilities removed the monitor. Biomed took the leftover equipment. For a while, 417 became a kind of limbo room, empty, unused, a square of space on the floor plan that no longer had a purpose. People still felt odd walking past it. The bed frame stayed. No mattress, just a bare metal surface with slats and a crank. Every so often, on particularly quiet nights, Lena would find herself standing at the nurse's station, staring down the long stretch of hallway toward the closed door. She could swear she heard something in there some nights. Not voices, not footsteps, just the slow, heavy sound of sleep. Sometimes when she passed by with an armful of linens or a portable suction machine, she'd hear the faint squeak of metal, the kind hospital beds make when someone shifts their weight. Once, when the door was left unlocked by mistake, a float nurse went inside to grab an extra chair. She rolled it out quickly, eyes wide. "What?" Lena asked. "The bed," the float nurse said. "There is no bed," Lena replied. "They took the mattress out." "I know," the float nurse said. "But it's like your brain still thinks there is someone lying there. I don't know how to explain it." Lena understood. There are places in a hospital where stories pile up the way linens do, layer on top of layer, folded together until you can quite tell where one ends and the next begins. 417 became one of those places. New hires heard about it in whispers, late at night, when they were still learning which elevators to avoid. During storms, which vending machine always ate your dollar? Which rooms had the best windows? Old nurses refused to sit in its doorway when they needed a quiet moment. Security guards doing their hourly rounds walked slightly faster past that end of the hall. Sometimes the cleaning staff would prop the door open and turn on all the lights, leave a cart in the doorway like a shield. The room always looked normal, a bed frame, bare, an empty wall, a blank monitor bracket, a cabinet with spare supplies. And yet, if you stood at the bedside and closed your eyes, you might swear you felt the slight give of a mattress under your hand, the faint exhale of someone turning their head on a pillow. One night, months after the room was officially closed, Lena had stayed late to finish charting. She was the last nurse at the station. Day shift had already begun filtering in. Night shift had mostly gone home. The hallway lights felt too bright after so many hours of dimness. She shut down her computer, slung her bag over her shoulder, and started toward the elevators. As she passed 417, something made her pause. The door stood slightly ajar. She frowned. The last time anyone had gone in there, facilities had been measuring for potential cabinetry. They'd talked about using the room for storage or converting it into an office. As far as she knew, no decision had been made. She hesitated, then reached out and pushed the door open a little further. The room smelled the same. A little cold, a little stale. The bed frame was still there, bare metal, no mattress. But as she stood in the doorway, listening, she heard it. The unmistakable sound of someone breathing. Slow, even, as if deeply asleep. She stepped inside. The sound didn't stop. If anything, it grew clearer. She walked to the side of the bed frame and laid her hand gently on the metal slats where a mattress would have been. Under her palm, the air felt dense, like there was something there, pressed against nothing. The breathing continued. In, out, in, out. Calm, steady, unconcerned. Lena lifted her hand. The air felt normal again, thin, empty. The breathing faded, like someone turning down the volume in another room. She stepped back. "Whoever you are," she said quietly, feeling ridiculous, "this bed is yours now. We want to bother you anymore." She didn't tell anyone she said that. It felt too much like giving in to the story. But after that night, she noticed something. The noises from 417 seemed to lessen. No more squeaks. No more phantom mattress dips. No more reports from passing staff of "I swear I heard someone in there." It was as if, once the bed had been left alone for long enough, the thing that had been restless there finally settled. Years later, after renovations and expansions and budget cuts, the hospital restructured the unit. They knocked down a couple of walls, combined spaces, moved departments around. 417 was absorbed into another footprint. Its door widened, its walls repainted, its number reassigned elsewhere. If you walked through that area now, you'd never know there had been a single room that caused so much quiet unease. But the nurses who lived through that period remember. They remember the patients who asked to be moved. They remember the bed that would not stay made. They remember the EEG that turned on with no cord in the wall. And sometimes, on really slow nights at other hospitals far away, they tell the story to each other, in break rooms and nurses' stations and parked cars at the end of long shifts. They don't talk about headless figures or slamming doors or dramatic apparitions. They just talk about a room where the bed never stayed empty. A room where, no matter how often housekeeping stripped it, no matter how tight they tucked the sheets, no matter how carefully they smoothed the blankets, the mattress always found its way back to the shape it had held for months. The shape of someone lying there, breathing, waiting to be left alone. If you've ever worked nights in a big building, you know that not all the weirdness can be explained with circuits and airflow and old pipes. Some places just carry the imprint of what happened in them. And in this hospital for a very long time, 417 was one of those places. The bed frame may be gone now. The number may be different. The hallway may have been remodeled. But if you ever find yourself on a med-surg floor late at night, walking past a door that all the nurses skip when they choose rooms, and you catch just the faintest sound of breathing in a space you know is supposed to be empty, you might be passing the next 417. No alarms, no codes, just a bed that never quite learned how to be empty again.